haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups. Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Please excuse the instances of poor sound quality throughout this episode.
Welcome everyone to Cult Chat. We're really excited to be here with a couple of amazing guests, Tristan Phipps and Kyle Eggleton, and we're looking forward to a really interesting conversation, and I'd like to throw the mic over to Kyle to tell us a little bit about himself.
Oh, kia ora. Thanks, Caroline. So I'm Kyle Eggleton. I'm ex-2x2 and was born and raised in the 2x2 religion, so a fourth generation, and I left when I was about 26, I left the 2x2s, and I'm 52 now, so I've had half my life in and half my life out. I work as a GP in the far north, and I'm also an academic GP as well, and have developed an interest over time, kind of thinking about injustice and equity and issues around how people can access health. And I've also become interested in family violence and coercive control as well. One of my roles is I'm a chairperson of a family violence support trust in the north as well. So I have become really interested in thinking about how I can use my skill set to help support people who are ex-2x2 members. And I've become a little bit impassioned over the last year or so, just thinking about some of the issues that have arisen in the 2x2 community, which we can talk about a little bit later. So that's me. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome, Kyle. Lovely to have you here. Tristan Phipps, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing here.
Sure. I'm also ex-2x2, born and raised. I'm fifth generation. I left over 20 years ago and sort of just put it in a box and carried on with life and did a little bit of healing and development there. And yeah, just recently in the last 12 months, actually thanks to Lindy, gave me a little bit of a platform at Cult, and that's sort of the first time I'd ever really spoken about my life and my background. But I felt really empowered at doing that, and I guess since then it's kind of snowballed in that I've sort of unpacked my life again and doing some more healing, but also just reaching out to others. I feel like my experience was I had a lot of support and I had a lot of people around me, and I know that's not as common. So like Kyle said, there's just so much has happened in that community, or should I say has happened for a long time in that community, but it's being spoken about. Mm-hmm. And just something within me to be like, my first career was as a teacher. So I sort of thought, there's sort of skills that I've carried over from that, like connecting people and organizing things and that kind of stuff. So I really opened back into the 2x2s again and revisiting what it was and what I was involved in. And it sort of spawned into introducing myself to how to reach out and connect with people who have left and give them some form of help.
Oh, wonderful. It's so great to have you both here and to delve into this topic, which has been in the news quite a bit lately. And I think many of the listeners may have heard bits and pieces here and there about the 2x2s, the church with no name, the truth.
People of the way.
The friends and family, is that another one? They've got many different informal names, but no actual proper name. And so it'd be really great if we can just cover a little bit about, just for our audience who may have never heard of this and don't even really know what we're talking about. So can we kind of open the floor up to a little bit of that background?
Give us the the Wikipedia version, because I mean you're both Kiwis, but we know that they're a global group, right? And so what are the, do you know the numbers globally? Do you know the numbers in New Zealand? Like, give us a picture of kind of, if you can, of the group globally as well as the scene in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, maybe I can kind of start off just talking about the history a little bit.
Yeah,
it's actually really old. So it was developed in 1897. There was a guy called William Irvine who was a missionary for something called the Faith Mission, and he was in Ireland, and he was trying to kind of like talk to people about Christianity, and he developed this doctrine over a period of time, which at that time there was kind of a little bit of a anti-establishment kind of movement and a bit of a religious kind of uprising, and many people
breaking away from the state churches, right? Like lots of Christian splinter groups were popping up.
That's right. You can see kind of like through history, kind of like a few alternative churches starting to develop at that time.
Yes.
So he came up with this doctrine, and the doctrine was based on some interpretations of the Bible relating to Matthew 10. Now, I'm not religious, but I do know my Bible reasonably well. And Matthew 10 was about how Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2 to go and preach the word. And he sent them out without any money, so they couldn't take any money, and they were to kind of move around from town to town. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And from Ireland, it spread quite rapidly. So by the late 1890s, they'd started spreading out to the US, Australia, and New Zealand. And my great-grandmother was Irish, and she had been converted to the 2 by 2s in Ireland, then came out to New Zealand and brought the faith with her. And some of her brothers were what we call workers. So the other thing with the 2 by 2s is this enormous terminology that occurs.
Yeah, and there's a structure, right? Even though they often don't actually have legal entities, do they? The way a common, a mainstream church has often got a charitable registration and a website and a clear governance structure. But the 2 by 2s do have a governance structure, don't they? But it's
yes, they do, but they don't say they don't. So the whole thing about them is that they say that they call themselves undenominational Christians, and that's what I was told when someone asked what church you go to. I had to say I was an undenominational Christian.
Yeah,
but they're not. They have this this rigid structure. It's quite hierarchical. So at the top you have someone called the overseer, and then below the overseer you have senior male workers called the brother workers. And then below them are the junior male workers, and then you've got the senior female workers, the sister workers, and then the junior sister workers. And then you have other people called deacons and elders, and then you have the rest who are called the friends. And we never, like when I didn't know what to call the 2 by 2s. It's only a name I've used recently because we didn't have a name. We just called each other the friendlies or the friends. That was the name that I used. We think at its peak, it might have approached about 1 million kind of people in the 2 by 2s. In New Zealand, I estimate probably about 10,000 people at its peak, which would have been about 80s or 90s. Currently in the States, we think there's something like about 75 to 100,000 2 by 2s in the States. So those are the general numbers.
That's the significant.
Yeah, the current number of people actually practicing as members of the group would be lower than 10,000 now, right?
Probably possibly 2,500. Don't know whether Tristan's got any ideas, but
2.5 to 3, somewhere in that range.
That's in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, can I ask a question around that? You were saying that there were around 10,000 and now there may be 2.5, 3,000, and it seems like it's a lot of sort of generational born-in members. Why? That's a significant drop-off. What do you think's happening there?
I think when we ask people why have they left, there's been a range. Some people have left, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 26 years ago for me, 20 years ago for Tristan, and we've left because of a variety of different reasons. It could be doctrinal reasons. It could be because we just didn't kind of believe in any of the stuff that they were talking about. And more recently, there's been a big child sexual abuse issue that's arisen. And it's called Brewer. So that started off in 2023. There's been a major exodus of people after that.
I look forward to hearing more soon about the Brewergate scandal, but to help us to understand more how that all happened and to keep with setting the scene, because many of our viewers and listeners won't even have a picture of what life in the 2x2s is like. Could you give us a bit of a snapshot? And obviously you've shared that for both of you, you were out more than a couple of decades ago, but what was a week in your life like when you were in there? And what is distinctive about the life of 2x2s?
It was very, very rule orientated. The claims would have liked to be that the rules were based on scripture in the Bible, but generally the rules were more man-made. And that was, to best conservatively, women have long hair. The saying was always, what is it, Kyle? We are in the world but not of the world, because we did go to normal state schools. We did and do what we would go to school, we would go to work. So we'd integrate in that way, but then there was a separation. And this varied between family to family as well, and the rules also varied between family to family. It was very much sometimes an interpretation. So some friends, you could have friends, some weren't allowed friends.
Outside friends, you mean?
They were called worldly people, or people outside.
Oh, that's like in the Brethren.
Some could play sport, some couldn't. Girls had to wear a dress, full stop, no matter what, whether it was going to school, doing PE. Boys got a bit of slack with that. They could wear pants. So lots of those rules were, very, very, very strictly enforced. So basically, we talked about the workers and the overseers. Yeah. You want to be seen to be doing those things around them, or that they knew you were doing them, so therefore you were on the right path. So things were done, I guess you could say, in secret, or that's where the hypocrisy comes in, where you want them to see that you're ticking all the right boxes, but if you did something else, you just didn't say anything.
Right. So people begin living double lives.
Because if people saw you doing it, you didn't want to see one of the other friends seeing you playing sport, because then you open yourself up to
criticism, judgment.
A day in the life would be, we attended 3 meetings per week. One was a Sunday morning, and that was in someone's house. The elder Kyle was talking about, that was their house, and we'd had our meeting. And then during the week, we'd have a gospel meeting, which was all the people, and that would be in a community premises. And then on a Sunday evening, after the Sunday morning, it was either afternoon or an evening, there'd be another gospel meeting in another large premises where everyone would gather. So they're
hiring halls, just hiring public halls, because they're not their own entity. They haven't got purchased property, but they have elders that are static in a location. But what about the workers? This is more a travelling, roving. How does
the workers are given a region, and they're in that region for the year, and then they will run the meetings that are in the community space. And on a Sunday morning, they can choose where they would like to go. But on the Wednesday night and the Sunday evening, they were the preachers in that space. And that just was your yearly routine. That's what you did for a year.
One of the real key things we haven't talked about with the workers is that they would live in houses of people in the congregation. So
that sounds like a real distinctive of the 2x2s, that they have actually got it built into their structure and their governance and their way of life, that they have this roving thing, which I guess has come out of their missionary kind of origins of having travelling, teaching and evangelists, right? And so these workers live in one place for a year, if I've heard you right, and then they move on, and they might go anywhere around the world, but each time are they usually married men or single men, or what's their sort of...
So there'd be single people, and it'd be an older person and a younger person. So an older brother worker would be overseeing the junior brother worker.
Oh, so were they often almost called to a celibate type of life?
Yeah, there were women as well. And one of the things about, they were celibate, but that celibacy was part of the purity culture that was in the 2x2s as well. And another real important rule-based kind of like value that they had to separate people from the world was about your consumption of social media. So in particular, when we were growing up, it was television, movies, and radio. You couldn't watch them. Now that has loosened up a little bit, but certainly in the kind of 70s or 60s, 70s, 80s, That was a really strong rule. But people did have television, and they'd often hide it. And so that's kind of like this hypocrisy and the cognitive dissonance that would arise from kind of being one person and then another.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I noticed one of you said that there's a hierarchy where men are above women. And what I've noticed in a rather obvious thematic kind of repetitive way is that in any group where women have less power than men, there's an absolute avalanche of abuse that usually follows. Is that the case here? Do women in this group have less control and power and more opportunity to be abused?
Yes, because there's more rules that apply to women. So the dress code is more strictly enforced. As Tristan said, they have to have long hair, and often their hair has to be up in a bun. Very conservative dress sense normally, but that there is variation. So there's a lot of control that's placed on women, and I think it's quite a misogynistic kind of entity as well. The sister workers, so the female workers, they have little control. They're told what to do by the male workers. And there's never ever a female worker that's the overseer. They're always male that are the overseer.
Mm. So you were talking before about people hiding things, the hypocrisy that comes in. Now, that's because they're rule-based, but there clearly must have been punishments for those who were disobeying, because otherwise you wouldn't have fear around being caught out. So what were some of those punishment mechanisms in play with the 2x2?
Well, it's probably the indoctrinated stuff, like, to put it simply, well, if you're not a 2x2, you are going to hell, like, because that is the best religion. But those other things also play into it, that fear of breaking the rules or not doing the right thing. But also, I guess the rules is if someone found out you were doing those things, like there's that level of, people knowing that you've done it but then there's also that sort of that hierarchy aspect that people would make you feel bad or whatever that you got caught or doing, so that kind of kept you in line, because no one likes people talking about you when you've, so then that would do the rounds, that so and so.
The use of shame and spiritual abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And were there other consequences?
Yes, there were. So people could be stood down from participating in the meetings. So, a length of time which they couldn't speak or they couldn't partake of the emblems that were shared around at the kind of end of the Sunday morning meeting. So that was quite common as well. If you got divorced and then remarried, that was a big no-no. So you could never ever participate in the meetings. So you could never come back. You could come along, but you couldn't kind of do your kind of morning talk or testimony at all. Excommunication did occur, but it didn't happen very often. So very rare. That was more used probably earlier on. So prior to my generation, excommunication was widely used. And there's, you can look in other parts of the world, and we're in the 90s, there was a large excommunication of kind of 2x2s in Alberta, Canada.
But there are some consequences socially, though. You mentioned when we were talking earlier about some forms of shunning. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess that's within the family, but also, within the other members. Like, it's kind of, simplest form, you could say, no one likes to be gossiped about or not spoken to, when you're a kid, when some kids just wouldn't talk to you for the day. That's actually what I'm talking about. Like, there's instances of families that, have done something that's not quite right and very easily moved to the side of the social circle. If there's a potluck dinner or something on, they just don't get invited. And, you don't have other friends outside of this because you're not meant to, then you're on the outer, And so that's a level of control, is almost to teach those people a lesson for doing what they did. And no one likes feeling unfriended, and, so there's those types of little, sneaky little tricks, and they're quite mean and quite playgroundish.
Well, they're very socially powerful and psychologically powerful, as you're saying. They carry a huge psychological impact of shame and isolation. So you're saying that, if I'm hearing you right, that it wasn't necessarily a strict policy, we're going to read it out in the church meeting, do not talk to this person, the way the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church has a particular line where they say, we no longer walk with XYZ, and like it's actually formally announced statement. Whereas you're saying that doesn't happen, but in effect the same thing happens of this social and psychological isolation and shaming.
Yeah, I have heard of instances where, not necessarily read out in a meeting, but of elders and sort of the higher hierarchy, always the men, of course, sort of getting together and saying, this is sort of what's come about. Let's move these people to the side, as you say. It was never,
that person's under a cloud or whatever. Yeah,
and there have been instances of people playing up, I guess, and they will call a special meeting together in one of those gospel meetings, and the topic will be around what's sort of gone on. I do recall one when I was younger, of a special gathering being called for all the people in that area to talk about this incident that we need to, toe the line. Yeah.
I've got two more questions, just quickly about the context of things before. I'd love to hear more about why they have blown into the media recently. Yeah, two quick questions. One is that they do have very large conventions, don't they, from time to time, where they do actually gather together, which is kind of the polar opposite to the quiet meet in the unnamed house thing. And, do they have them in New Zealand? Can we go along and attend one possibly? And my second question is around publications. Do they produce their own publications, their own ministry or written material? Is it possible to get hold of, their theological ramblings?
You go, Kyle.
Oh, okay. Well, the conventions are really a critical part of the 2x2s, and it was part of the Faith Mission in Ireland. So they had conventions, so gatherings in big tents. And part of their theology or doctrine is that they don't meet in man-made buildings. And so the original, so that don't like churches specifically constructed for worship. So originally the conventions were held in giant tents, huge circus-like tents that were erected on farms, and they would have 2x2s who they would kind of get them to own a farm, so that the farm was owned independently away from the church because they didn't have any money, and they would have big tents and people would come. There'd be Tristan, 1,000 plus people at the convention, and held over summer, so kind of that November, December, kind of early January period where it's stinking hot. And you're sitting in this enormous tent, just kind of fainting away from the heat on hard seats. And it was 5 days, I think. But it was segregated as well. Like males one side, females the other. And then later on, it kind of became a bit more mixed. So originally, the dining, you couldn't eat together with males and females. And the sleeping quarters are still kind of separated, males and females.
Wow. So Dad will be with the younger children in a bunk room and Mum will be with the younger girls in a bunk room. There must have been a little bit of excitement at it, but actually those sorts of groups living together, close quarters for long extended periods of time, the family unit not together for really good supervision, there's quite a potential here for abuse to occur or for lack of for supervisory neglect. Has that been something that started to come out with the revelations of the group?
I guess we probably can talk a little bit about that with Brewergate, but I totally agree with you. Like, you don't understand this stuff until you're an adult later, because you're conditioned to be like, it's about a trust thing, right? It's 100% trust, 100% trust, and particularly around the workers, it's 100% trust. Like, because they are who they are, then will be all right, and because it's designed by them, then you need not worry. And I'm sure we'll talk about that when we get to Brewergate. But Linda, you were saying about where they are in New Zealand. So there's one in the South Island and 3 in the North Island. And they're all pretty much around the same time, sort of beginning of December into January.
Wow.
And they're all rural properties.
Okay, they're still in big tents, are they?
Some of them are half tent, half shed now, and I think some have moved into full shed. Again, I haven't been for 20 years, so
okay, yeah.
But yeah, full dining rooms, yeah, big rural properties. And as you said, can we just attend? I'm going to say, if you just roll in, there'll be lots of questions as to how did you get here? How did you know this was here? And why are you here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you know Tristan Phipps and Kyle Eggleton?
I'm here to hand out Olive Leaf Network pamphlets.
I believe that about 3 of the evening meetings in a convention are open to be gospel meetings, but they never advertise it. So you wouldn't know that it's an open one.
They might be worried more about the media at the moment.
Yeah, and the other thing about the buildings is that it's quite ironical because they have this philosophy or a doctrine about not being in man-made buildings, but these buildings are specifically constructed for the purposes of having worship, but they're owned by a private person. So that's how they kind of get away with it.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
So Lindy, the other question you asked was just about doctrine, and do they have anything written? They don't. A really important thing is that they say that everything comes from the King James Bible. So that kind of preferentially use the King James Bible. The only other kind of written thing that they have is their hymn book, which is written by, they believe it's written by workers, but the genesis of it is it's not. It's written by a whole bunch of other people from other churches, but they've adapted some of the words to kind of fit their theological thinking. So any references to the Trinity are removed. So the non-Trinitarian church, and they kind of they don't emphasize grace or faith. So for those of you listeners who are kind of from a Christian background, this church doesn't kind of go along with the doctrine of grace. It's by works is the important.
Okay, so the group, the 2x2s, have come to the attention of the media recently with some pretty big scandals. Could you tell us about that?
Okay, I'll set the scene. So there was this sexual abuse scandal that developed in 2023, and it was an overseer in the United States. His name was Dean Brewer, and he died suddenly in a hotel. And it was a bit odd for an overseer or worker to be in a hotel. When eventually they looked through his laptop, they found that there was evidence of sexual abuse material and child sexual abuse. And there was also wads of cash in his suitcase as well. And so that kind of like created, once that was disseminated, then it kind of brought to people's attention the kind of the prevalence of child sexual abuse and sexual abuse that was occurring within the 2x2s. And there was a lot of people that started talking and speaking up about the impact that their own personal kind of stories, and multiple people started leaving. The church, or the 2x2s, weren't very responsive, and so they didn't kind of address the issue and tried to cover things up. And the sexual abuse was widespread, so it was international. It occurred in the States, Canada, Australia, and in New Zealand.
I remember it coming out even in Britain, and then just this rolling impact of the wave coming through Australia, and actually talking possibly to you, Tristan, in those early days, and just saying that the wave, it's going to come to New Zealand, and a bit of an encouragement to sort of be prepared and have some people and networks there, because there's a lot of fallout as people think about what's happened to them and realize they're part of a bigger movement where there was a systemic issue. People feel quite let down.
So what did you see here, Tristan?
So it was kind of a flow-on effect, as Kyle said. Like, New Zealand, I guess, was kind of last to the party. But I think the commonality is that it was happening everywhere. It is happening everywhere. But because of the way the setup and the hierarchy and the power given to the workers and the overseers, those sorts of things were dealt with in-house in their own way. So what's becoming now is this stuff has been going on for a long time, more than anyone's ever realized. But the difference now is, I'm going to say, social media has helped. I'm going to say we have more discussions in society around what some of these words mean now. Like, we know what grooming is. We know what all these things are. So then the dots are being joined as to people going, that happened to me, or this was. So, as Kyle said, the covering up of things was huge. And there's a lot of people out there that know a lot of things, whether it was covered up by work, but it's sort of that flow-on effect of people have realized it's been a tidal wave for a long time, and some people have kept quiet, or other little things have been done to shift people around to make sure, we encourage people to go to law enforcement and whatever, correct, but there's also that encouragement of not to do that, because it brings attention to this lovely, beautiful way that we have. So basically what's happening is there is far more widespread than we even know. I think we're just touching it in terms of how people that have been affected by this, and the way that it's being dealt with is not healthy. It's not, it's trying to be
by the church itself. It's not healthy.
Trying to be dealt with by scripture, by those sorts of things, when really it's gone past that, in terms of we need safe practices and things like that put in place. But of course, that's pushed back because it's not being controlled by scripture, or they're having to bring other people to see what's going on. And just like we've talked about, they don't want other people to see what's going on. But the sad thing is, good and sad, is that it's bringing out a lot of people who are speaking up about the horrible things that have happened, but also how it has and hasn't been dealt with. So,
has the FBI's involvement played a role in that? I mean, like, to me, it seems to extremely validate the reality of the experience when an American law enforcement agency is looking at New Zealand, because and internationally, it's like it just sort of, the stakes just go way up to counteract, I'm sure, what is a lot of messaging that this isn't important,
So knowing that no matter where you are in the world, it's been linked to the FBI. And New Zealand or Australia, you can make contact and they are joining the dots. But you're 100% correct, and the message was, this won't affect other countries, it's only going to affect America. That's because, but it's untrue, of course. But yeah, that's been a massive wake up as to, wow, this, everyone knows who the FBI is.
Yeah.
So they're asking questions. But it's given people a lot of validation who have been holding on to stuff for a long time to be like, well, these people are taking this serious, and so they should take it serious, whether it's a church or not.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking all by itself, just the fact that there's an international FBI investigation into child sexual abuse. That by itself is shocking, without it occurring to people who will have had this experience normalised and minimised and diminished and hidden. It's like doubly shocking, I imagine, for those who are, victims. So,
and I've been thinking about the FBI involvement with the New Zealand police, and they've just had 4 years of a lot of exposure in the Gloriavale realm with similar kind of high control group, a lot of similar doctrines, and these things have actually set a platform for abuse. I guess what we find frustrating is that the group rarely accepts their own responsibility. They just think it's a few bad eggs here and there that they had problems. But they don't realise that actually the way they structured the group, structured even workers in the homes, and their doctrines have led to abuse. And then it leads to cover-ups. It's all part of the way these groups operate. So I'm hoping the New Zealand police have got a better understanding of that now, and that they don't need the educating that they needed a few years ago.
I totally agree, Liz. I mean, that's the whole structure has set up, this abuse to occur. There are huge amounts of control and kind of power that the workers have, and the way in which they're kind of held and kind of idolised by the friends. Now, just to give you an indication about the prevalence of sexual abuse, there's been some work done by American ex-2x2s looking at the allegations of sexual abuse by people within the 2x2 and ex-2x2 community. So there's a website that's been set up where people can kind of talk about, or kind of say that they've been abused and who the perpetrator is. There's been 1,000 workers and elders who have been alleged perpetrators. And of course, there'd be multiple victims of those 1,000 people. When they do the estimates of the proportion of the workers, the proportion of the clergy in the 2x2s, and compare that to the Catholic clergy, with known sexual abuse allegations. The rate of sexual abuse allegations is 5 times higher than the Catholic clergy in the 2x2s.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just, oh.
So is this what motivates you? Because you both just said that it was 20-something years ago that you left, and Tristan, you said you put it in a box. So what's motivating you 20 years on to come out into the space in the last year? And what is it that you are doing in this space? Can we migrate the conversation that direction?
My motivation is, personally, I'm a victim of a survivor, I'd like to say, of indecent behaviour, which I was unaware of at the time. I spoke about it for the first time about 12 months ago and reported it. I have people close to me who were also survivors of such things. Some had buried it for like 30, 40 years and downplayed it. I guess you summed it up perfectly, Liz, is the CSA and all that, all the abuse is a byproduct of the system. Without the system, it's not there. I know it's a focus. It is a very important. I'm not downplaying that. But the part that leads to all this is from the beginning, the structure, the hierarchy, and the pay. Unfortunately, the payoff is all these things we're dealing with now. So as someone who feels like my transition out of and my life within the 2x2s was relatively simple and normal and uneventful, to then come back in and sort of hear all this stuff happening and be like, well, I know it doesn't just take one person, but you sort of feel a conviction of like, no one's saying anything, which is fine. There's some people out there that have suffered some horrific things and they probably won't or whatever. But there's also a portion that aren't with us anymore who passed away in silence. And that bothers me because they're people very close to me. And it's just a cycle that's going to continue. I've connected with nearly 200 survivors in 12 months, and they will all tell you exactly the same thing. So it's like, it's not just a one-off thing. There are damaged people out there. There are damaged adults. There are damaged teenagers, and there are damaged people in their 70s and 80s.
Damaged families as well,
who don't have the voice to speak, which I get, through their circumstances. So after sitting on something for 20 years and doing stuff and rebuilding my life, it's like, well, I do feel in a space where I have that confidence to say, you know what, Kyle and I talk about this a lot. Well, we're extremely embarrassed of our backgrounds, and I haven't really spoken about it with anyone. Even my partners, my current partner doesn't really know. Recently she has through what I've been doing. But then I just thought, well, I don't need to be ashamed of that anymore. Like, this is who I am. It's helped sort of craft me into who I am. So let's just be honest about it and talk about it because it's real. Like, I can't change it. I'm not angry about it anymore. I'm not angry at anyone. Okay? I'm not whatsoever. So therefore, there's other people out there who are hurting or don't have a voice. And it's like, let's just have some open, honest, real conversations about the facts. Because they are facts. They are facts. And they're people's true facts. And as I said, I could put you 200 people in front of you now and they'd probably say word for word most of the stuff that Kyle and I have said. So we're not just crazy people out there making up stories about something that happened to us. It's just what it is. I had never spoken about any of this really until the cult last year. How crazy is that? For 10 minutes. And I felt so at ease doing it because I felt these people actually understand what I'm talking about, because anywhere else people would think I'm nuts, right? And that's kind of what it came to. So that's good. The drive behind it is we're our own best resource in that we all have experience. So let's get all of us together. And it's been so cool the last 6 months, honestly. It really has. It's families reuniting, it's old friends reuniting, and it's just genuine friendship. And hey, man, this happened to me too, right? You're not alone.
What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I guess I thought I'd left the 2x2s a long time ago. And, I tried, a little bit like Tristan, just tried to move on. My life wasn't, too odd. I did feel a bit weird going along to the Sunday meetings, and I felt a bit embarrassed talking about my background, but I had a fairly normal upbringing. But when kind of like people close to me, I realized had been really harmed. And when I realized that there was someone that was close to our family who was a perpetrator, then that really got me angry and really upset, and it kind of set a fire within my soul, really. I've spent a lot of time working with people as a GP, trying to, improve health and well-being. And my PhD has influenced a lot by critiques of power. So I really saw that the power structure was something that was really problematic. And I guess that fire within me from that anger and the knowledge about how power works is the thing that's been driving me to try and see what I can do to try and help and, advocate perhaps, to perhaps do some research. I think that there's lots of health issues, so physical health issues, mental health issues that are prevalent in the 2x2 community. There's been no work done on that. I'd really like to do some work in that area as well. It's a bit odd coming out and saying, hey, look, I'm a cult member. It's a bit embarrassing, but hey, I've got no control over the fact that I was born into something, and neither do my parents have any control of them being born, nor my grandparents. So there's generations of people that have had no control over their lives and the experiences that have been imposed upon them.
And it's such an unselfish thing to do, because really, I think, Tristan, some of our early phone calls, I recall saying this could well disrupt your life. This has the ability to really, you're on the cusp of potentially, you're now, and let's talk about it, you're creating networks for people to connect, and you're starting to support people and offer opportunities for people to meet together. You're really involved, and it can become quite all-consuming. So what are some of the things that you've set about doing in the last year inside this space?
Yeah, well, I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants, really. It was literally about 11 months ago that another ex-2x2 member who I've been good friends with for a long time, we remained friends after we left, and we had talked about the Brewer thing and what was happening, and he was very keen on getting something into our media, because it was never there. There's lots of things to be said, and pulled together a few of our friends. I think there's about 5 of us, and just sort of brainstormed. And I think you remember, it was exactly a year ago, an article came out in the Herald. No names of people were anonymous, which is fine, and that sort of started it, and then it sort of rolled from there. So we just decided, where are all these? We knew some of them. Where are all these leavers? Like, they're out there, and you know what? Some of them are out there living their life and are completely uninterested in reconnecting, and I totally get that, because that was me. Majority that I wouldn't. If you'd asked me to do this 4 years ago, I'd have been like, no, I'm not interested. I'm all good, thanks. Yeah, and it was just, let's create a space to, try and bring these people together. So we literally created an online group and an information page, and all I did was just put stuff on there about it. And then we sort of reached out to people we knew, and sort of like, we need to try and make this safe space and try and just find leavers, because we want these people to connect. And someone would tell someone, then it sort of became word of mouth. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I got no idea. Like, there was people in there, but they weren't saying anything, which is understandable. Like, it was all new, sort of, and so then I just thought, right, I'm just going to give this a nudge. So I started reaching out and just connecting with people. I think, Lindy, I messaged you going, hi, I'm so-and-so, like, this is what I'm trying to do. And hey, how's it going? And just sort of, and then it just sort of, I connected with some people in Australia who are kind of doing the same thing, and they gave advice. And then it just, the last 6 months have kind of been a blur, really. It just kind of sort of just came into this ball, and then there was Decult, and then we had this most amazing catch up with ex-members who came to Decult, and then some others who were just on holiday, and we met up for this coffee, and it was just this from, lots of different generations of people came together, and some turned up I didn't even know lived there, and then from that moment it just kind of morphed into, and then it was just, we can do this, and just started more networking with more people, and then they'd invite people, and then the article that Kyle and I did this year kind of, kicked it right into gear. And so it's still kind of flying by the seat of our pants, but I think we kind of have a bit of a direction in terms of people just want to connect. They want to chat.
Yeah, there's so much power for former members and connecting with each other. And sometimes there's a richness in connecting with others from different groups, and because there's still always a phenomenal overlap. But there's such a lot of good to be found often in connecting people from your own group, because I mean, Kyle, I had to laugh earlier in the session. You used the word emblems. It's a super weird, old-fashioned word that so many people wouldn't have a clue what it means. But I know you're talking about Holy Communion, you know, the bread and the wine, because we used that word in the Brethren. So again, it probably came from Ireland in the 1800s. And yet I haven't heard someone use that word for like 15 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, he used the word emblems. This is hilarious. And it's some of those moments that you have when you get with others from a similar group or from your same group. It's like, oh yeah, you know each other's that language and the heartache as well. So that's it's so amazing that you guys are speaking up, and it's so needed. So thank you both for that. And in the show notes, we will share resources that you guys have shared with us, recommended resources for anyone who wants to know more about the 2x2s, or recommended resources for other former members or current members who might be asking questions and trying to put the pieces together. So we will share some of those things there, and we'll share there how people can reach you both as well. But is there anything you can share with us? You know, I mean, you've already shared some of the good outcomes that you're seeing of there being families and friendships reunited, and you know, some healing work happening. Is there anything else good that you're seeing? And is there anything that to you is you're seeing some of the unique challenges that people are facing?
I think, you know, as you say, the fact that you can connect to other people and you've got a shared history and a shared story and a shared language that you can use, I think that's really important. You talk about connecting with family. I mean, the thing is, the 2x2s are all interrelated. So, you know, we're all cousins or cousins to each other. It's kind of a little bit really incestuous, the whole thing, which is kind of hilarious in its own self.
I think so you'll meet a former member, and you'll after 5 minutes you'll discover that they're your great grandmother's aunt or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a little coffee group, kind of around the country that Tristan had set up a few weeks ago, and that was really kind of powerful as well. I think, you know, whatever happens, it will be something that will be, I think, decided by the community. What's going to meet the needs of the community. I'm really interested in kind of participatory kind of responses to things. So as someone who has some knowledge or kind of understanding, I don't want to impose that on other people. I think that the solutions need to be driven by the community itself. And so who knows what will happen?
When we were talking earlier, one thing you guys did come up is you wanted to communicate to anyone who's a therapist working with survivors of the 2x2s some of the unique things that they could understand better in order to meet the needs of their clients who've come out of these groups. So anything come to mind?
I think for therapists, it's just kind of having an understanding about the 2x2 culture and about the unique challenges, perhaps, that they have been separate from the world, but, you know, part of the world, that they're kind of like a little bit stunted, perhaps, sometimes in their development. Just kind of like those developmental stages that occur can sometimes be suppressed in high control environments, and it certainly probably occurs within the 2x2s. You know, I guess the challenges of knowing that sexual abuse is probably quite prevalent within our community. That's kind of like a big thing, and how do you tease that out as a therapist? I mean, kind of just knowing that that's a possibility. And also, you know, we didn't talk about religious trauma or spiritual trauma or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which I think are really prevalent within this community as well. And then the overlap of physical illness, which seems to occur as well. So a lot of people will have unexplained disease or inflammatory diseases, which are probably driven by a stress response they've experienced. So those are the things I think therapists should know about within the survivor 2x2 community.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. There was a lady who wrote a book, Elizabeth Coleman. She was a former 2x2 from Australia, and a former Gloriavale member read her book and said, wow, this was my life. Like, just all the elements and aspects summed up her life, and that book could have been given to a therapist to say, here's how to help someone who's left Glory Vale, here's how to help someone who's left a 2x2.
Yeah, I would also put a plug in there for any therapist who does want to upskill in these areas. We've definitely got some episodes on Culture. We'll put them in the show notes too, specifically around helping to upskill therapists, supporting former members of high control groups. And also you can contact us at the Olive Leaf Network, because we've got a wonderful list of recommended resources for therapists, and former members can pass those on to their own therapists as well. So if anybody wants that, feel free to email me at the Olive Leaf Network as well. It's an amazing day and era to be a former member in, isn't it? Because more than ever before, I think there's been such an explosion of research. There's still much more to do, but there has been an explosion of research and resources. You mentioned religious trauma, Kyle. I also recommend to people looking up the Religious Trauma Collective that has just been launched at the end of last year in Australia, and their focus is on Australasia, and they've got amazing resources for people who've experienced religious trauma. So it's so helpful to start wrapping your head around some of the resources and support that is available.
And it's a growing number that's available. I think that's what's amazing, is there's just been something happening in this sphere in the last few years. And I think there are a lot of sort of culty groups who are primed and ready to receive, some of the background work that's being done and research. I think something of interest that keeps coming to my head. So there's been a lot of exposure. There's a lot of people connecting together. I think the reporter Amy Williams, I think she has been doing an excellent job just looking at it through that lens of sort of trauma-informed media reporting. I think she has done quite well in that sphere. Is there more to come, or do you feel like the big efforts have been made and now it's just seeing what else comes? Or what are you waiting? Is there something you're waiting for? How's the group responding? Are they imploding slowly? What's happening?
I think numbers, from what I gather, there's been exoduses like in chunks of time. I believe there was another one last year. Not sure of what's happened so far this year, but I would give props to Amy with her media stuff, like very detailed. She's obviously reaching out to former members and people, and she's doing a good job of. And I think that's probably asking what's to come. I think it's far more explanation needs to be made around what it is, who they are, the ins and outs. I still think, there's more to come around that in terms of what this group is and history and just facts and just historic information. I think, I mean, working in this space, I'm not too concerned about what's happening in the other group, as you could say. Like, my focus is what will be with that. Like, these kind of groups are going to operate, but I just think I wouldn't call it a conclusion or an end game, but it's just getting the information out there so people are informed. And particularly, I guess the good thing to come out of it would be that less people start their life being taught this stuff, and that breaks the cycle. Less children starting out, this is normal life. I think, having been there and being an ex-member, and Kyle would agree, as a child, not knowing that stuff and just starting off life a different way. So if that means people vote with their feet by leaving, and that's because of, having this awakening, then, but in that time, let's try our best to be there for the people that do leave.
Amazing. Yeah, so how do people contact you?
Well, we have a public page on Facebook called Surviving the Truth NZ, and there is a tab in there where you can send a private message. I think that's probably the best way. You'll understand, we want to create a safe space for people to talk in, and that's been the best feedback I have had from people. We're talking about people who have left for 40 years and saying, just talking about this stuff is the best therapy I've ever had, even since leaving, and just talking about it. And I'm like, well, the fact that they're in there laughing about some things, like the emblems, having a laugh and reminiscing on this stuff, they said it's just been so good, and the healing and the therapy that they've never had. So you want to keep that space specifically for people who have left. I understand there's probably people sitting on the fence or thinking about leaving, but they're not in that same headspace as those. We're talking about very vulnerable people, and we want them to feel safe, as we were when we left as well, So it's about making sure that you've got those boundaries and there's that space for people to come in and, we don't need them to tell us their life story. We just need, if they want to just sit in there and see the content and see what's going on, brilliant. That's fantastic. If they feel like that's somewhere they can come each day to get a bit of help. So yeah, I think that's the best way. And then as I say, it's just been a word of mouth, and I think the right people will find it in the end.
Yeah. It's been amazing to have you both here, Kyle and Tristan. Is there anything else you'd like to share just before we head into our wrap up?
No, look, I think thanks very much for kind of having us on the show. There's this whole lot more that you could possibly talk about the 2x2s. It's a very kind of complex and deep thing, but I think hopefully we've provided a bit of an overview and this kind of like highlighted a pathway for the future for those people who have left the 2x2s who want to connect and get some support.
Absolutely. It's incredible work you guys are doing. So, yeah, well done on speaking up, and thank you so much for coming on the show. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you guys have both come in and talked to us and filled a little bit of a gap in the knowledge space around this for us and for our audience. So thank you so much. It's been a real honour.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And for our listeners, head to our show notes because there are some details there about podcasts and some more books and websites where you can find out more about the 2x2s. You can also head to the Facebook page that's been talked about if you are a former member and are looking for a place of connection and support. And we thank our listeners and Plains FM for giving us an opportunity to get out on the airwaves. So don't forget that we also have a way that you can contact us. We have the Facebook page. We have YouTube comments. You can leave a review there for us. And we've got an email. Don't forget you can send us ideas and requests and feedback to info@cultchat.org.nz. Right, listeners, good to have you here with us, and thank you again to our guests. Very grateful for your time. Night, everyone.
Good night.
See you later.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Matawa.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.